On October the 19th, there's going to be a BC provincial election. What I wanted to talk about is what are the stances of BC's major political parties in regards to the protection of nature and old-growth forests. Nature protection, of course, is vital for our health and well-being, for the climate, for biodiversity, for First Nations cultures, and for the economy. The BC Conservative Party takes a extremist anti-nature protection stance. They say that they would absolutely axe BC's protection target of 30% by 2030. They plan to turn all 22 million hectares of BC's unprotected productive forests, the so-called timber harvesting land base, at the center of all the conservation controversies into a guaranteed logging zone that obstructs new protected areas. Even in areas where biodiversity is supposed to be prioritized, they say that logging can still continue as a secondary value. It's a log everywhere agenda. And they're also promoting gross misinformation that protecting 30% of the province would result in 30% less food production, which is crazy because the farming takes place on private lands, not on the crown lands or the public lands where the protected areas expansion would take place. And they say that 2/3 of British Columbia, of BC's forests, would be off limits to logging. They fail to mention that the majority of those 2/3 are alpine, rocky, and muskeg bog forests where you have small stunted trees of low to no timber value. The BC NDP are taking a general pro-protected areas stance, and they've taken us leaps forward, but are still missing some key policies. They have committed to doubling the protected areas from 16% now to 30% by 2030. They've secured over $1 billion in provincial federal funding to make it happen. They've protected over 300,000 hectares of Clayoquot Sound, the Clinziza Twin Sisters area, and the Incompoflow valleys. They are negotiating with dozens of First Nations to save millions of hectares of additional ecosystems, including old-growth forests across BC. They have opened the door to a potential paradigm shift to overhaul old-growth policy in BC after decades of policy stagnation and place moratoria on over 1.2 million hectares of at-risk old-growth forests. However, they have still not brought in ecosystem-based targets. You need targets for every ecosystem based on science and traditional ecological knowledge so that protected areas can't skirt around and minimize protection of the big trees and the most endangered ecosystems, most contested for industry. They haven't brought in deferral funding as well for First Nations and their lost revenues if they were to expand logging deferrals into all of the most at-risk forests. And they haven't closed logging loopholes in old growth management areas and wildlife habitat areas. So there's still work to be done. The BC Green Party takes a stance in favor of protecting 30% by 2030, including all of the old growth forests in British Columbia by working with First Nations. They believe in long-term stable funding for nature-based solutions and protection. And they say that they would appoint a chief ecologist to counterbalance the chief forester in BC and to prioritize ecosystem health. They have not said that they're bringing in ecosystem-based targets directly. They need greater specificity in that regard. And yeah, there's a whole lot of other details that you can see on our website about where the parties are at when it comes to nature protection and old growth protection.